Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. How about this? 3 top 25 matchups in the SEC on Saturday shows you just how good this league has become in basketball. And I do want to start with what should be probably the most marquee matchup of the day, a top 10 matchup at Rupp Arena. By the way, I've been to that mall that's attached to Rupp Arena. That place is going to be rocking at probably 6, 7, 8 a.m. In the morning in Lexington on Saturday. But top 10 matchup. As of right now, we do not have an actual point spread yet. We're recording late Thursday into Friday. I do think Kentucky will probably be a slight favorite, but these are 2 really good teams. 2, I think, of the more surprising teams maybe on the national scale. Now, you know, Torres was a little higher on Kentucky than everybody else, but even Florida has been phenomenal. So let's go ahead and dive in. And when I look at this game, listen, we've talked so much about Kentucky, and we'll talk about them in a minute. But I do want to take half a second to talk about Florida, because I don't know if I ever remember a team that is 13-0 at this point in the year that has been talked about less than the Florida Gators. And the one thing that stands out to me about Florida, I was thinking about this, is that, listen, Todd Golden, I know he's going through a very serious investigation off of the court at Florida, and I'm not here to speculate. I'm not here to make light of things. I do tend to think, my personal opinion, that if Florida believed that the allegations had validity, I don't think they'd be letting him coach. That's another conversation for another day, though. And if you're putting that aside and you're just talking about the coach, Todd Golden, to me, is one of the rising young stars in this sport. I was thinking about it. He kind of reminds me a lot of Kenny Dillingham. Ironically, they're both from Phoenix. Young, but both of their teams really play like they're coached by a guy from the 80s, 90s, whatever. We mentioned this in the college football playoff stuff, but Kenny Dillingham's Arizona State team, they play like they're coached by a guy straight out of the 1970s. Run the ball, play defense, don't make mistakes, don't turn the ball over. And Florida's kind of the same, balanced in basketball on both ends of the court. And I do think it starts with the head man, Todd Golden. Again, a lot of conversation about off the court, but on the court, he has been excellent as a young head coach. If you haven't watched this team in terms of what they do well, one, it starts with the 3 guards, Walter Clayton, Elijah Martin, and Will Richard. So Walter Clayton was there last year, transfer from Iona a season ago, played under Rick Pitino at Iona, does not follow him to St. John's, instead goes to Florida. Walter Clayton was really good last year. I would argue he's been even better this year. 17 points per game. He is the team's leading scorer, also shooting the crap out of the ball from behind the 3-point arc as he's shooting the ball really well. Will Richard and also Elijah Martin, both of those guys are putting the ball in the basket. Elijah Martin, interesting story, came from Florida Atlantic. You know, basically the insinuation when he committed was he was going to be a point guard. I'm not sure that when he committed, I fully believed it, but he has been playing, playing that one spot. I think he's been playing pretty well. He's averaging 15 a game. Will Richard, 14 a game. Do think it's worth noting, Clayton is shooting the ball really well, 37%. Will Richard, Elijah Martin, both at about 32.5%, 33%. So they're shooting the ball well, but not great from behind the 3-point arc with their guards. But also think, if you haven't watched them, I think what stands out is that they have 2 big guys that shoot the ball really well. Alex Condon, Thomas Hawk, both guys 6'10", 6'11". They're both shooting over 40% from 3. So a couple guys that can space the floor. Ruben Chinyenlu, if you remember our portal coverage, I talked a lot about him. He's kind of that true low post guy. He leads the team in rebounding, second on the team in rebounding, but really he's a starter, but he doesn't play a ton. And actually, Florida's a little bit like Kentucky, from the perspective of, in the SEC right now, you have a lot of these low post guys that can really take over games. Janai Broome, Cliff Ombiori. Florida really does it from the perimeter. Even their big guys shoot the ball really well. So that's what Florida does on offense. Defensively, this is the part where I think, again, this is a team that feels like they're coached by somebody much older than Todd Golden, who is 39 years old, because defensively, they're really pretty much as good as anybody in college basketball. Top 10 in field goal percentage defense, top 10 in 3-point percentage defense. They're about top 25 or so in points allowed. And to me, that's more of a byproduct of the fact that they play a little bit faster. There's more possessions in their games. So they're really good defensively. Offensively, very much the same. From the Kentucky side of things, listen, we've talked about them a ton. Kind of an interesting couple weeks. It's just that there hasn't been a lot going on in the world of Kentucky basketball. They've played a grand total of 2 games since December 14th when they beat Louisville at home. They obviously played that Ohio State game that was nothing short of a clunker right before Christmas. And then, of course, played Brown just a few days ago. But they're back on campus. They're back in a groove. And I think what stands out to me about Kentucky, I think this is a team. I think they got to get in the rhythm of playing again. Because when I look at this team, listen, they're 11-2. They've beaten Gonzaga. They've beaten Duke, both on neutrals. Gonzaga was more of a road environment than a neutral, but you get the point. But like, I don't feel like they've really clicked at the highest level since early in the season when they were playing 2-3 times a week. I really do think there's something to, as a team, they're kind of out of a rhythm. Now, the good news is they turned it on in the second half against Brown, were completely dominant. The Ohio State game, listen, this is college basketball. This isn't college football. Everybody's allowed a clunker here or there. I'm not really worried big picture about that individual game, but I do think in the bigger picture, my concern is you got to get some of these guys back in a groove, right? Kobe Brea was basically the best three-point shooter in college basketball for about the first 6 to 8 weeks of the season. Last 3 games, 2 for 6 from 3, 2 for 7 from 3, 2 for 7 from 3. So not great at math, but that's below 33% each of the last couple games. Jackson Robinson had been playing pretty well, 8 points against Brown. And really what's becoming a little bit of a concerning theme outside of Lamont Butler, outside of Otega Owe, just not a ton of consistency on the offensive end of the court for Kentucky. So I think you want to get consistent. Listen, we've talked about Amari Williams and Brandon Garrison down low. I don't think either of them, at least this year for Brandon Garrison, Amari Williams is obviously in his last year. I don't think either of them is ever going to be a guy that you just dump it to and you feel like, okay, we're getting 2 points on this possession and that guy's going to get us 18 or 20 in a game. But they play their role, they do their job. And, you know, I think this is kind of a nice spot for those two guys because, as I said, Florida really doesn't have those bigs that are just going to bruise you around the rim like a Janai Broome, etc. And so as we get to the pick, I actually will just say this. Florida's the top 10 team, the top 5 team, or I guess they're number 6, but they're the undefeated team. They have not lost yet. But I actually do like Kentucky to win this game. And it's really for a few reasons. The first one, and I think this is going to be a big story early in league play, okay, is a lot of these teams, we got to remember, in 2024, now 2025, a lot of these elite college basketball, they just don't play a lot of true road games early in the season. The way we do scheduling now, it's a lot of neutral court one-off games. It's a lot of neutral court tournaments, Maui Invitational, Battle for Atlantis, whatever. A lot of these teams don't play a lot of road games. And so Florida, to this point, it is now January 3rd as you're watching this video. Florida played 1 true road game. It was at Florida State. And let me just say this. Florida State won. I think we're all realizing maybe a little bit more of a train wreck behind the scenes than we all realized as Leonard Hamilton is literally being sued by his former players. But 2, Florida State, even in a rivalry game, is going to be a lot different than Rupp Arena. I think it's interesting. I looked it up on Thursday. Tickets to get into Rupp Arena on Saturday, over $100 just to get into the arena. That is a pretty high price for a January college basketball game, especially a place like Rupp Arena that holds 20,000+ people. So it's going to be well over 100 to get in. It's like $700, $800 for some of those lower level mid-court seats, over $1,200, $1,300 for courtside seats. So that place is going to be rocking. And Florida, this group specifically, just has not seen anything quite like it. I'll also say this. Listen, this is not a tear down Florida segment. I do kind of question, I don't want to say the validity of being 13-0. They've beaten everybody on the schedule. You can only beat who you play. I'm not trying to criticize, but I'll also say if you kind of look at the schedule, some of the teams that maybe looked good on paper in September and October when this schedule came together, you start to realize like, I don't know, those teams maybe aren't quite as good as we realized, right? The signature win for Florida to this point is a game in Charlotte against North Carolina. Speaking of neutral court versus true road venues. Well, listen, North Carolina is 8-6. North Carolina just lost at Louisville, and Louisville's down 1 million guys to injury. So, is that a great win for Florida? Beating Virginia. Virginia is obviously a disappointing team. Beating Wake Forest. Wake Forest isn't a great team this year. Arizona State's okay, but not great. So, I just don't know that Florida has really tested themselves against the best of the best in college basketball. Finally, from the Kentucky side of things, there's really 2 things. One, I do think this is a pretty good matchup stylistically for Kentucky. Besides being at home, I think that home crowd is going to help. We saw the last time they played a marquee home game at Rupp Arena. Everybody shot lights out. They obviously put up 80-something points against Louisville. Lamont Butler had that incredible game. But two, again, stylistically, I think the matchup kind of fits Kentucky well. I've said it 2 or 3 times. Florida does not have those physical low post guys that I think can take over games in the paint. That's going to be a weakness for Kentucky, I think, all year. And I just don't think it's going to be an issue against Florida. So I like the matchup. I like the venue if you're a Kentucky fan. And lastly, I will say just on one last quick Kentucky thought, because Florida is going to be fine. Florida is a really good team, but with Kentucky, I know there's a little concerns about the shooting and the this and the that. I truly do believe this is a team that, in my opinion, like I said, needs to get back into a rhythm. I know the competition is going to get much tougher than it's been, and I don't think that anybody this year in the SEC is going 17-1 or 16-2. I just think the league is too tough. But this is a situation that I do think, like Kentucky, you got a bunch of rhythm shooters. Well, you get guys out of a rhythm, haven't played in a week, haven't played in 10 days, have played one game in 7-8 days. I think Kentucky's going to pick back up here as we get into SEC play. So I'll say a final score of something in the neighborhood of like 78-71, because I do think Florida's good. They'll play good defense. Kentucky isn't putting up 88 points in this game, I don't believe. But go ahead, give me Kentucky to win this game at Rupp Arena. And as you just saw on the screen, if you are a Kentucky fan, make sure to follow our Kentucky-specific page, Torres on UK.